Welcome to this explainer. We often think of public relations, reputation management, and even cancel culture as these super modern inventions. But today, we're exploring a truly fascinating and highly specific world that proves otherwise. The ancient monastic laws governing the early Buddhist nuns, known as the bhikkhunis. We're going to be looking specifically at excerpts from the 10 Recitations Vinaya. This is a foundational text that details exactly how and why these rules were actually created. And hey, if you think ancient religious texts are just full of abstract philosophy, you are definitely in for a surprise. These texts are deeply human, incredibly practical, and they offer a really striking window into the gritty, daily reality of early monastic life.
Okay, let's dive right in with a recurring, honestly pretty frustrated quote that sparked all of this. How can they be called bhikkhunis? Now, this wasn't just idle gossip. This was literally the primary catalyst for ancient monastic legislation. You have to remember, the early Buddhist community relied entirely on the lay public for everything: food, shelter, clothing, the whole shebang. So when monastics behaved in ways the public deemed inappropriate, like acting a bit too much like wealthy aristocrats or just everyday lay people, the public complained. Their donations were put at risk, their public image was severely threatened, and that required immediate, decisive intervention.
To wrap our heads around all this, we're going to break it down into 5 key areas: the precedence process, managing wealth and donations, regulating the physical body, social conduct and public image, and finally, travel duties.
So starting off with Section 1, the precedent process, or what we can essentially call ancient monastic case law.
These rules weren't just made up out of thin air. The early community used a strict, legalistic formula to handle PR crises and maintain their delicate public image. Honestly, the Vinaya reads a lot like ancient case law. Here's how it worked. Step 1. A nun does something that causes a stir. Step 2. The lay public, or sometimes other strictly ascetic nuns, complain, asking that famous question, how can they be called bhikkhunis? Step 3. The matter is brought directly before the Buddha, who questions the offender. And finally, Step 4. A highly specific rule is codified to ensure that exact thing never happens again. It is incredibly systematic.
Now, when things went wrong, the Buddha established 2 main tiers of penalties, depending on the nature of the offense. First up, we have Nisaggiya Pachitya, which is a bit of a mouthful, I know, but it essentially means forfeiture and expiation. This required handing over improperly gained material goods along with a formal apology, and it was heavily used for economic violations. The second tier is Pachitya, which simply requires expiation and repentance. This was typically applied to behavioral, social, or bodily violations. This clear distinction really highlights just how seriously the early community treated the mismanagement of material wealth.
Moving right along to Section 2, managing wealth and donations, looking at the economics of the Sangha.
Picture this ethical dilemma. During a really severe famine, a group of nuns took donations that were explicitly earmarked for constructing public lodgings, and they used that money to buy food just to survive. Now, from a pure survival standpoint, that makes total sense, right? But the public was absolutely outraged. They accused the nuns of acting like queens or ministers' wives, misappropriating public funds. The Buddha actually had to step in and apply that forfeiture penalty we just talked about, strictly banning the use of donations for alternate purposes. The big takeaway here? Donor intent was absolute, even in the face of literal starvation.
We actually see strict economic caps placed on personal wardrobes too, specifically to prevent alienating working-class donors. For example, a nun named Dhammadinna was given highly expensive clothing by some wealthy merchants. We're talking one winter coat valued at 500 coins and summer clothes at 250 coins. Once again, the public complained that they looked like aristocrats, so the Buddha stepped in and codified absolute limits, a maximum of 4 coins for heavy winter clothes and just 2.5 coins for light summer clothes. They really had to look the part of ascetics.
All right, shifting gears to Section 3, regulating the physical body, purity and boundaries.
The sheer breadth of this discipline went way beyond just what you owned. Eating garlic, for instance, was completely banned. Why? Because a group of nuns over-harvested and accidentally wiped out a layman's entire crop. But it also got incredibly intimate, shaving private parts, inserting fingers beyond 2 joints while washing, or even slapping the body to make it look more plump and attractive. All of these resulted in immediate Pasiccia penalties. The ultimate goal here was to completely eradicate vanity and any kind of sensory indulgence.
The case law gets incredibly specific here, and honestly, entirely unexpected. So a nun named Thulananda, who actually pops up pretty often in these texts, crafted an artificial phallus out of tree resin. During a sudden fire at the monastery, they had to evacuate, and she forgot to remove or hide it. Passing merchants saw the device and immediately started mocking the community.
Because of this exact wildly specific incident, a brand new ruling was codified banning the use of tree resin, leather, or even root vegetables for artificial devices.
To completely wipe out even the mere appearance of impropriety, exact boundaries for sleeping arrangements were codified. 2 nuns couldn't share a single bed, they couldn't share a single sleeping mat, or even sleep under a single covering blanket. The texts do note that this rule arose because nuns were engaging in impure acts, but importantly, it also protected the community from the rumor of such acts. Just the rumor alone could devastate their reputation overnight.
Next up is Section 4, Social Conduct and Public Image, Living in the Public Eye. We also see some very direct economic conflicts popping up. For instance, when 2 nuns who formerly belonged to aristocratic families decided to cook raw food for a local festival, they completely circumvented the local lay cook. He complained bitterly that they were stealing his job and threatening his livelihood. Because monastics were meant to live strictly off alms and absolutely not compete in the local labor market, a strict ban was placed on nuns cooking raw food.
You have to remember, these monastics were deeply human. Get this, during one meal, an argument escalated until a monk lost his temper and threw rice right in a nun's face. She immediately retaliated by dumping a bowl of hot soup right over his head. Literally an ancient food fight. But the resulting legal codification is super fascinating. Rather than just making a rule saying no food fights, the specific rule created was that nuns are forbidden from standing and serving monks while they eat. It completely removed the physical proximity that led to the conflict in the first place. Pretty clever, right?
But perhaps the absolute biggest PR disaster happened when a nun threw waste over a monastery wall and accidentally hit a passing official named Minister Mani, who served under King Pasenadi. This caused a massive panic. The nuns literally fled the monastery in pure terror of government retaliation. Ironically, the minister forgave them and even offered them supplies, but the sheer panic it caused the community led the Buddha to strictly ban throwing waste over walls or using grass to dispose of feces.
To protect the community from any kind of damaging gossip or accusations of illicit affairs, social interactions were intensely micromanaged. You couldn't stand alone with the man in a hidden place behind a wall, or even out in the open where people could see and whisper about it. You certainly couldn't sit in the dark without a lamp, and you could not dismiss your chaperone just to have a private conversation. The overarching theme here? Total, undeniable transparency to prevent any hint of scandal.
But internal community harmony was just as crucial as external PR. Rules were explicitly created to stop toxic petty behaviors. Things like throwing waste on fresh green grass just to spite people, or pulling a guest nun out of her room into the rain out of pure jealousy. There's even a rule forbidding dramatic self-harm during arguments, like hitting oneself and crying loudly, and a really strict ban on cursing other nuns to be reborn in hell or lose their path to enlightenment.
And finally, that brings us to Section 5, Travel and Duties, the Rhythms of Monastic Life.
This really brilliantly highlights the balancing act these early Buddhists had to pull off between 2 competing values. During the rainy summer retreat, nuns were strictly forbidden from traveling. Why? Well, because lay people complained that walking through fields during this time crushed fresh-growing grass and killed summer insects. However, immediately after the retreat ended, the rule completely reversed. Nuns were legally required to leave their lodgings and travel for at least one night. This forced mobility essentially prevented them from getting too comfortable and forming permanent worldly attachments to a specific house.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with a rather provocative question. When we look at all of this extensive case law, the absolute limits on clothing costs, the bans on cooking, the intense micromanagement of social behavior, were these ancient laws purely about achieving spiritual purity? Or, in reality, were they the ultimate survival guide? A masterclass in early public relations designed to protect a very fragile, dependent community from alienating the very society that kept them alive? It is a fascinating lens through which to view ancient history. Keep exploring, and thanks for learning with me today.